Welcome to the Pixel Retentive Podcast, where we, a business owner and an artist, discuss the business of art and the art of business. Hey friends, I'm Carl, founder of Epic Made, and today I'm solo hosting this episode of the Pixel Retentive Podcast, where we share our thoughts on creativity, art, and business. Past guests include Fred Siebert of Fred Films and MTV, Justin Alanis of Storyco, and Amanda Russell of Cream. We are forever grateful for the supporters of our podcast, and we are always looking for more sponsors. That said, Pixel Retentive is always brought to you by the creative gurus at Epic Made. Epic Made is a team of artists and strategists who excel in visual storytelling. Our studio crafts unforgettable animations and illustrations that not only captivate your audience, but also drive tangible business results. We specialize in engaging imaginative, pop culture savvy audiences with beloved clients like Nickelodeon, WWE, and Sci-Fi. Visit getepicmade.com and let's collaborate on your next creative campaign. All right, so with us today, we have Lee-Sean Huang. Lee-Sean is the Senior Director of Learning and Programs at AIGA, the Professional Association for Design. He co-founded Foossa, a design strategy consultancy, and he has taught at NYU, the Parsons School of Design, and the School of Visual Arts. Welcome, Lee-Sean. Thanks for coming out.
Thanks for having me, Carl. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Yeah, man. I'm excited to have you. So before we jump onto today's topic, we want our audience to get to know you a little bit better. So can you tell us how long you've been in your industry and the project you are most proud of so far?
Wow. Okay. So I guess,
No pressure.
Yeah, in terms of the how long, I feel like it's kind of a fuzzy number because I got into design kind of self-taught before I went back to school. But if we count from since I got out of my master's program at NYU, it would be, about going on 14 years now. And in terms of a project that has been most impactful for me, there's been so many, but the one that I would say made a real mark on me was I had a chance to collaborate with the Parsons School of Design and the City of New York on a service design project a few years back where we were redesigning financial services for New Yorkers. So things that the city provided for people who live and work in the city, in particular, a financial counseling program. So making that more accessible for New Yorkers who needed help with their finances.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds like a really cool little passion project there. So that was while you were in school or part of your master's degree, you said?
No, that was actually like after I graduated. It was I'm faculty at the new school, at the Parsons School of Design at the new school. And so there was a lab there called the DESIS Lab, Design for Social Innovation and Sustainability. And so as an affiliate member of that lab, as a part-time faculty member, we did this project with the city. So it was
oh, wow.
Yeah, kind of an academic / professional partnership with the city.
Super cool. So what were like some of the results or the at least the kind of higher objective? Like I understand it was for people like that have financial need, but what was it hoping to accomplish?
Yeah, there was like a variety of touch points we were looking at, both from like just the discovery aspect of this. This is one of those things where it's free if you're a New Yorker, but a lot of people just didn't know about it. So there was that aspect of it and kind of streamlining some of the things, like making it easier to sign up for the service once you learned about it. But I think one of the main immediate impacts, because rolling out a lot of this stuff, especially at, in a city as big as New York City, takes a long time and happened after we exited the project, was getting public servants thinking about design, right? Like thinking through the lens of design in terms of especially experience design. Like what is it actually like for a New Yorker to get access to these financial services, to learn about them? Because not that these people aren't empathetic or perceptive, but that a lot of the day-to-day of being a bureaucrat running a government service involves like checking boxes and filling out forms and stuff like that. And so sometimes there's just a loss of like thinking about what is it like on the other side of things. And so by bringing them into this process as designers with our observations, with our recommendations, it just helped the people actually running these financial services to think in that way. So I think that, bringing that perspective, I think, is a great part and an important part of a lot of design projects, which happy to talk about later in the more general sense too.
Yeah, I love that. Oh, that's definitely important. Yeah, I mean, And it's so easy, especially like you said, in a government job and those sort of positions where you're just kind of going through the motions. Like you've got these check boxes and you've got to check them, and it's not really you're not really thinking about the customer experience. So that's fascinating. Awesome. Well, yeah, let's kind of pivot into today's subject. So, we're going to talk about bridging the gap between designers as craftspeople. So, just from the top, I'd love to hear like what does that mean to you, Lee-Sean? Like,
yeah. So what that means to me is, I think I alluded to this a little bit about like how I got into design in the first place. So I come from like a pretty multidisciplinary creative background. I started, well, I would say my very first design project was when I was like in junior high or something. My parents owned this computer store, and they were installing this server room kind of thing. And I think they were just giving me something to do that day. It was either like a school, like spring break or something. So I was just hanging out at my parents' store. And so like I drew this thing about like how they could install the racks, right? And just like drew a little blueprint in my like 12-year-old kind of scribble or something. So I remember that as like an early design project, so to speak. But kind of growing up, I then was involved in music through my teens, 20s, early 30s. And so got into like graphic design more specifically as an independent musician, making our own, album covers and stickers and t-shirts, all those things that you do as a musician. And so for me, it was always like through that lens of like art and self-expression and craft, in the sense of like, oh, I'm going to learn Photoshop, or I'm going to learn whatever tools to make stuff. But then, fast forward into becoming a professional, I worked for an agency called Purpose out of grad school, and then started my own studio, Foossa, which you mentioned in the introduction. I realized that a lot of those things are table stakes, or those are like the things that we get into the profession because we're interested in them. We want to make beautiful things. We want to play with the latest software and learn that. But then there's all of these other things about like, how do you talk about design to non-designers? And a lot of our clients are what I'll call like low information buyers. Not that they don't have taste or don't know what they want, but they don't necessarily know all that goes behind, say, a brand identity, right?
Sure.
They think like, oh, I just want a logo and pick some colors. How hard could that be? You know what I mean? Versus like the strategy behind it, the process, especially if it's like for a corporate kind of environment where there's multiple stakeholders and things like that. So I think that's what I mean by this gap of like, there's the things that attract us to design when we start out, and then there's the things that often we learn from the school of hard knocks as professionals, whether you go freelance or start your own studio, all of these things about like, how do you sell your services, price your services, explain your services to civilians, all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, I still, I was one of those crazy people that never worked for a studio. Mm-hmm. And I started my agency while I was in design school in Norfolk at ODU. And I figured everything out by just suffering through doing it wrong, right? They teach you a lot of the, like by the school I went to, right, a lot of the conceptual stuff, and then even a decent bit of skills in software, but like all that stuff kind of goes out the window in 2 or 3 years. You have to stay on top of it, or you're at the least not going to be productive enough to compete, let alone if you don't even know the right softwares anymore. But and obviously those markets have been diversified like crazy since 2007 when I graduated, right? Like I think Adobe had just bought Macromedia back then, so we didn't even, it was blending all those tools in. There was still Flash.
Yeah, I remember learning Flash in school, and I even taught a college class on Flash, and I don't think I remember any action script to save my life at this point. It just feels like a different century at this point.
Doesn't it? It's so crazy. Like it goes by so fast, and then you look back, it's like, how is it 10, 12, 13 years later? And it's like, not doing any of the same things, but it's all just like transforming. But conceptually, it's all the same, right? Like, conceptually, like there's a deeper understanding of what the application of this design is and how it serves the people that interact with it. But like the tools and executions they're all different now, right? Which is crazy. The last episode we just did was about the transition from like artist, designer to director, and like how that could be a whole head trip for some people, and maybe not the right step for some people as well. But so we had some other notes here, like So the soft skills to bridge this gap, between designers and craftspeople, you had mentioned that. Love to talk some more about that.
Yeah. I wish we could rebrand this term soft skills in a way.
Okay.
I've heard like different alternatives to it. I don't know if I've like decided on one myself. I've heard power skills out there as well, which sounds pretty cool. Who doesn't want to be powerful? But I think it's all of these things that are maybe not necessarily written into a job description, right? It's not like a bullet point that you can put on your resume of like, oh, I know, often recruiters are looking for those like quote unquote hard skills or like specific things like, oh, do you know Adobe? Do you know Figma? Whatever those things are. But then there's these other ones that feel kind of fuzzy. Maybe that's why we call them soft skills of like, okay, how do you be persuasive? Or how do you, make an argument, convince your client to go along with something? I think some of these are things that you can learn, maybe through the lens of performance in terms of like, okay, how can you enter a room with confidence? But other ones, I think we can really use the vocabulary of design and the mindset of design to think about, right? Like, for example, there's a framework that I share with my students about like presenting your work in terms of like options, right? So there's like, there's three, and obviously this is just like a starting point, a rule of thumb, but say you're presenting three directions for a brand identity. There's safe, which is like something that that they'll go for, like say it's a corporate client. It's like, okay, it's not too out there. And then there's stretch, which is like, okay, you're stretching things a little bit, maybe challenging them a little bit, but still they're not going to be like, whoa, go running out the room. And then depending on how well you know these people, maybe there's like a surprise as well, right? Maybe you don't expect them to pick that, but it allows you to maybe push the envelope a little bit on the middle one of stretch, right? And again, these are just starting points. You have to like know the context, know your client. It's not like a one size fits all formula, but there's things like that where you can think about this through the lens of experience design, right? Like just like how on restaurant menus, they'll put like maybe the lobster and steak up top when that's like the $40 entree, but then it's like, oh, it makes the pasta for $25 seem like a good deal, right? So there's all sorts of these things that we learn as designers from how our choices are shaped. And so we can also do that in terms of how we present our work, whether it's like the different packages you're selling in your studio or how you present like different design directions, all of these sort of things. They're not necessarily, maybe it's soft skills, but it's also directly related to our craft in that sense. But thinking about that as also part of the craft and not just whatever you're doing in your software, I think is what I'm talking about here.
Sure. That's like the business side of creativity, right? You know how to do your job, like technically wise, but if you're trying to like freelance or even be a part of the sales process, like there's a whole other animal that you need to be aware of, and all those things fall into that, right? Like, like you said, you give them three pitches. Well, which one do you want them to go for? Well, that's the one you price the most reasonably, right? Like, you price this one that's like super safe, like maybe a little higher than you might, right? But like this one is like a little bit above that, and then the crazy idea you make really expensive, but like you're thinking they're not going for that one anyways, but it makes this middle one you really want them to go for probably look more advantageous. I don't know, do you have a strategy around how you price those? I
don't think you should ever like present work that you're not going to like run with. Obviously you can still refine it as it develops, right? But it's still like, okay, it's also a way to think about this as like diagnostic. It's like, what do they call those, like Rorschach tests that psychiatrists give people, right? And they're just like these ink blots. And so sometimes it's also a way for you to learn about your client, right? Obviously you want to learn about them through your pitch process and onboarding and all of that sort of stuff, but you're going to learn about people and how they tick as you're presenting your work, as they're giving feedback to your work. So this is also a way to learn about how they tick in that sense, right? And so, I think it's hard to talk about in the abstract, like how I would price each one of these, but I think it is also a way to see, like, okay, what are they willing to commit to, and like, are they really hiring you? It's a good way to also help them understand that they're hiring you for your expertise and not necessarily like just a pair of hands, right? Like you want to like filter out those clients who are like, oh, I know what I want, but I just don't know how to use Illustrator, so I'm going to like hover over your shoulder and tell you how to draw my logo, right? Like, so you don't want to get into one of those situations where it's like, okay, well, what is your expertise, whether it's, understanding their clients or how to translate their ideas and their business goals into something visual, whatever that is, right? So each one of these touch points is also like a teaching opportunity, which is where I have my professor lens on too, as well, especially going back to this idea of a lot of design clients are low information buyers, and that like, okay, they have taste, they maybe know what they like, but they don't necessarily know all that goes into a design project, right? And so like there's a lot of learning that has to happen there, not just like selling or these little manipulative cognitive tricks, which can be important, but like there's an educational value to them, I think is the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, absolutely. You're positioning yourself as an expert and not just a tool in the tool shed. Like, hey, you're not just going to use us to hammer a bunch of nails. I totally understand that. And that's a positioning thing right out the gate, like making sure they understand that you're a professional and you have experience and that's what they're hiring you for. And like you said, figuring out quickly if that's not their mindset and getting out of there, because you're never going to get your value if you go in there with this, the person that's breathing down your neck is never going to pay you what you're worth. And they're also going to undermine all of your great ideas because they think that they don't need you. They just need someone to run this computer thing for them, right? Like, right. And I've seen that, I think every designer that's been in the space for long enough and eventually you're going to have that client and you're going to go, and then the light bulb's going to go off, like, I'm never doing this again. And you're going to look for those red flags for sure. So, and it's interesting that you also mentioned, like, there are some like sales kind of, like you said, more, manipulative type of things, right? That's just working into human psyche, trying to position yourself in a space there. But that's also entirely different from like presenting yourself with the value and expertise and setting the standard of like, this is what I do, what we're about, and how I expect to be treated. And then you set the expectations properly out the gate for that client relationship. So that's enormous.
Totally.
Yeah, let's see. Anything else you want to add in there? Like, what are some other cool things that you like lean into in your professorial state for some of your students?
Another part of it is also like asking questions, right? Whether it's like being more like Socratic with my students of like, okay, well, we read this article about, say, design and power and, or like, say, digital surveillance, whatever the topic is. These are all topics that have come up in my classes recently. And then it's like, okay, well, how does this affect you in your daily life, right? And get them to reflect on that sort of thing. I think we're long past education as content. Like, there's so much stuff that's already available, whether for free on YouTube or through online classes that are relatively low cost, right? Like, you don't need to go to design school to just watch me lecture in that sense, right? I'm not just doing that. You're really coming for the experience, both with me and with your peers, in that sense of like the discussions we have in class, the critiques, the feedback that happens, right? Like, those interactions are way more valuable. If you want like a lecture about a certain thing in content, like all of that is out there, right? There's much cheaper ways to learn that than like dropping 5 figures a year to go to design school, right? And so I think that's another part of it too, is like learning how to give and receive feedback, but also how to ask these probing questions, whether it's for my students, but also with potential clients and projects, of like figuring out, what is it that they want, right? Because maybe they're not a fit, and it's like, oh, well, you actually don't want to invest in this project, and maybe you can just get what you want from Fiverr, or your cousin's son can just do this for you, and then you can figure it out. And like, but I don't want to be involved in that. But like asking those questions up front really is about that mutual learning as well. For sure, yeah. I mean, and even it's even worse now, right? Like on the other edge of things, where a lot of people think like they can just
prop some things in, like some sort of image generation, right? And it's like you can point them right in that direction now too, which is nice. So like, when they don't, when they're not a good fit. So let's see, like, what are some of your favorite questions to ask in that process to kind of unveil some of those things? Not to put you on the spot too much there, but if there's anything that you have off the top of your head, that'd be interesting.
Yeah. Again, I feel like this is also very like project and context specific,
Sure.
But in terms of like general ones, I think it's interesting to ask about like experiences that folks have with, and it doesn't even have to be related to the field or the project, right? It could be like a particularly good like travel experience or a hospitality experience or something like that. Especially when it comes to experience design, service design, where it's still seen as kind of fuzzy from various buyers and clients who are not necessarily like living and breathing this every day. It's less maybe immediately tangible or recognizable compared to like a logo or a book design where people can really interact with it, right? But if you ask them like, oh, what was a great customer service experience that you've had, or what was a bad one and why, then you can start getting them thinking about like systems. I feel like, one of the things I think about, I used to travel a lot, not so much anymore, for work, is that when you're stuck in an airport line, like everyone starts turning into a service designer in a way. Like you start like thinking about like, oh, how can they make this security line more efficient, right? And like you're just thinking about all of these sort of things while you're stuck behind people who like still don't realize you have to take your shoes off or whatever that is, right? Or like all of these sort of processes, and you're like, okay, how do you just make this more efficient through design? Or at least I think about this sort of thing, and I think a lot of people do if you start like pressing them on that. So it's things like that where they can tap into their own lived experiences to understand, like, this is what a service is like, this is what an experience is like, and these are all of the different touch points in it. And then they realize like, oh, this was the product of design, whether on purpose or just through neglect and defaults. And this is why, airport security is the way that it is. But I think that's a great way to get them thinking in terms of experiences and user journeys and all of that sort of stuff, even if they're new to it.
Very cool. Yeah, I do. Oh my God. I did a lot of traveling in March. I went to New York, I went to Boston, did a couple, conventions and cool things there. But yeah, I got stuck in a TSA line running late for my plane. I'm just looking at it, it's like, why do we have one person funneling? It's like 100 and something people here. Like, that was so frustrating. But you're right, we sit there and everyone's a critic now. Everyone's got ideas about how to make it better. That's funny. I never really thought about that, but it's so true. It's pretty cool, man. You mentioned here a little bit about your performance background and how it relates to design as a performing art. That's pretty fascinating. You want to talk?
Yeah. This is something that we're thinking about. I guess we can make a soft announcement here on this very podcast. So the AIGA Design Conference next year in 2025 is going to be in Los Angeles, right?
Okay.
Home of Hollywood and La La Land, Tinseltown, whatever you want to call it. So we've been thinking about the theme for that being design as a performing art. And what I mean by that is a lot of the things that I've talked about already, right? Like there's certain things that we immediately consider to be a performance, like a designer giving a talk on an AIGA stage, right? That is a form of performance, but so is like pitching your client in their conference room. So is like the interaction, maybe conducting a focus group or a one-on-one user research kind of thing. Like we don't necessarily, it's not a performance with an audience per se, but it's a performance in the sense that you prepared for it, right? You've planned for it, whether you've written your script for the user interview or you've just done this before and you know how to improvise, but you know what the rules are of that improv in that sense, whatever that is. So focusing on that part of design, because there's plenty of other venues where we talk about the latest tools and all of these sort of things. So I'm like really curious about that. Like on a slightly philosophical point, because communication design in general is something where the barriers to entry are lower than ever, or there's fewer gatekeepers in this sense, right? As long as you can afford the tools and the software and stuff like that, like you're a designer basically because you say you are and you can act like one, right? And it's like there's trade-offs to that, and a different conversation we can have about certification and licensing and all of that, but that is the current reality. So it's like, okay, if you say you can do this, then like how do you prove it, or how do you do it effectively, whether it's in that client pitch or in that user interview or whatever, right? These are all performances in that sense. And where I'm coming from this, both from my music background, as I had alluded to earlier, but I also started studying comedy in the last year or so. I took this comedy writing class at SVA. One of the nice perks of being part-time faculty is we get to take classes for free. And then I've also been doing improv here in Providence, where I live now. So I've been doing improv comedy as well. So just understanding like some of these dynamics of how performers think and how you can pivot on the fly, come up with something, and just being flexible in that sense, I think is a really important skill for designers to have that isn't necessarily explicitly taught in school, or certainly I didn't have that. Like we had one elective class that was practicing how to give presentations. Like it was an elective class like before our thesis, where we basically got feedback on like giving talks, and the teacher would count like how many times we said and stuff like that, right? And we'd get feedback on stuff like that, but that's only one form of performance. But if we think about all of these other touch points as performances, then we can start rehearsing for them, planning for them, scripting them out in that way, right? Which a lot of people already do on an individual basis, but can we talk about this as a community? I think is one of the things I'd love to address in our next conference.
Yeah, that's great. I've got a whole bunch of thoughts on that. So first thought is like back in the day, when I went to design school, like we had to print our work out and mount it and trim it, and it had to be perfect. And like, if you messed up any little piece of that, you'd lose a letter grade. And that was before you put it up on the wall next to the entire class who all had the same assignment. And then you had to justify your work. You had to get up and go, hey, so the assignment was this, and I needed to do this, I needed to do that. And again, to your point, like you can't go there and go, and seem all incompetent, because you're presenting your work in a way, trying to explain the value of the critical thinking and the design process that you went through that led you to this result. And this is why you think it's the most effective design. And all those, soft skills that go into that, that was part of my education, which maybe I take a little bit for granted because I hadn't really thought about it. When I go audit these classes now and check them, I go speak at, some of the universities and stuff, and they don't do a lot of that anymore. They certainly don't print things out and put them on the wall like that. Why are we wasting all this paper? Like, but and I get it. Like times have changed. Like that doesn't really make sense anymore. So that's interesting because that for me has led into like where I'm at now. I have an agency, right? And we do, and I call it a studio because we're more focused on the creative than like ad placement and ad buys and all that sort of stuff. But we have to pitch ideas, right? And you have to be able to put together a succinct pitch deck with your ideas of what you want. You're asking for, $100,000. Like you better deliver that shit with some pizzazz, and it better,
Totally.
And it better sound good and be exciting. And you better sound excited about it when you talk about it. And if you don't have all that, it's going to fall flat. It doesn't matter how good the idea is. So I think there's a whole, like you're saying, that in itself is a performance, right? If you're not performing this and you don't rehearse it ahead of time, I mean, I always go over the deck. I'll pitch it to my wife. Hey, does this sound good? Let's say it this way or do it that way. Boom, boom, boom. Because we want to close this deal. We want to get this project to move forward because we believe in our ideas. And then when it goes full circle and you execute and the science, the stats and numbers behind it go, well, yeah, you said it was going to do this and it did that. And holy shit, right? Like we just did an ad for somebody that we pitched. It was an amazing ad. You got like an 8% click-through rate with like a 1 cent cost per click. That blows all the metrics out of the water. That's amazing. Like that's what we do, right? Like real critical thinking, real collaboration, pitching that idea to someone that's like, well, that's a little weird, but like that's the things that are a little weird, a little off the norm. Those are the things that either fall flat, right? Because you took the wrong gamble, right? You made the wrong assumptions, or they're like right on the mark and now they're outperforming everything, right? Like normally ads are, for this client in particular, like 1%, click through rate. We got 8. Like that's amazing, right? Like,
right. Totally.
That's a fucking smashing victory, right? So that's what you want. And again, if I didn't present that right with my team, like we might not have even had the opportunity to have that success.
So, right. So it sounds like there's like both the clarity of that, but then underlying that is the trust building, right? That they have to trust you enough to like maybe get that stretch idea, that surprise idea that is challenging them in a way, but it's like, okay, well, they trust you enough that they'll go with it, or they'll do limited ad buy on that and see what happens, right? And so there's that sort of thing. I think this performance dynamic comes up a lot also in facilitation, which we haven't really talked about yet, which is like, you have a brainstorming session, whether you're the creative director and you have your own team within the studio, or you're bringing your clients in so they can get their ideas on the table, on the Post-its, on the whatever, right? There's something about that as well, of like, how do you make people feel comfortable, especially in maybe more buttoned up corporate environments where it's like, oh, they don't want to sound stupid or something like that. But it's like the ideation session is where you want to sound stupid, right? Like, cause sometimes you just have to like get it all out, get out the stupid ideas first to get to the good ones, or the stupid ideas will make you think of the good ones. But like, there's a sort of disarming that needs to happen, which, improv theater people are good at, because twice a month when I'm on that stage, it's like all sorts of stupid stuff happens, right? But like, you kind of need that to get to the good jokes, right? That come up organically, where, one of the things I've learned from the improv comedy is that you shouldn't try too hard to be funny, and sometimes it's like, you don't want to try too hard to be creative either, in terms of like, I mean, you should try hard in terms of like, you should practice all the time and make stuff all the time, but there's a kind of effort that's not necessarily helpful, right? Like sometimes, like I see this sometimes with student projects where there's like a try-hardedness more in terms of like, oh, you just learned these fancy effects, and so you decided to use all of them, right? Or like, there's like, instead of like editing,
and glow and a bevel, and
and it's like, that's not necessarily showing that you're a great designer. It's just more of like a maximalist, like throw everything in the kitchen sink kind of approach. And so, like learning where to hold back or where to be confident in, like, say, a more minimalist kind of thing. So all of these are things that we learn, right? Often through on the job kind of stuff. And those are a form of performing as being an effective designer, but we don't necessarily talk about it through the lens of performance. And so that's why I'm really interested in having these conversations.
I love it. Yeah. So there's a whole vein of emotional intelligence, right? Like, so can you read the room? Can I look over at this guy over here and see that like he's a little uneasy? Like he's not really engaged in this. He doesn't know what to say. I can tell like his gears are turning, but he doesn't want to sound stupid maybe or whatever. So like a lot of times when we're doing these like creative jam sessions, right? It's like, all right, well, there's no dumb ideas. And we try to like, I'll try to be the first one that says something just stupid, right? Like, and I'll try to like bring the environment to somewhere that's fun and whimsical. Like, what if we did this crazy, ridiculous idea? And they're like, no, that's too crazy. But like, wouldn't that be funny? And then, but that might spark a reasonable idea that came off the vein of like, well, that's insane. But this over here is a little more like, this might actually work. So you get into that space where there's no bad ideas. We're ping-ponging ideas. Everyone's laughing and having fun. And it's an engagement and a whole experience that people enjoy, right? Like I had one of my clients tell us that the other day that there's a whole level of value that we should be presenting about how much fun we are to work with, right? Like this isn't stuffy. This isn't like your comb over 3-piece business suit group of financial advisors, like, or even like your huge agency folks that are just going to have that level of corporate America about them that is just, I don't think anyone really enjoys that. They all just like put these expectations on each other and like do this little like corporate America dance, but like no one has fun there. Like that's not a fun thing. So I think breaking that all down, seeing the environment, setting the tone in those meetings of like creating a safe space for people to ideate, because 5 bad ideas in a row might lead to a good idea that nobody thought about, and that might be the gem, right? You got to mine through a bunch of crap sometimes. So then that's got me thinking about that. So that's perfect way of saying that. So.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I feel like a lot of like, especially with facilitation, is something that I picked up well, before I even became a designer, I was a junior high school teacher. That was my first job out of college. And so I walk into rooms, like when I was running Foossa, our studio, as my primary thing before I came on staff at AIGA full time. We did a lot of facilitation work, often in very corporate environments or in like government environments and stuff like that, right? And it's like, okay, sometimes they're just difficult people, right? Like they're just like, they think they're too important to be there, or their boss made them come to this thing and they had no idea what to expect with these crazy creative people in the room or whatever. So you have to like give them some experience or like a reason to like be vulnerable or say something a little stupid that they don't want to do, right? And sometimes we've brought in props like Play-Doh or Lego sets or stuff like that, where it's like you get people out of their heads and like trying to sound smart by saying like, oh, well, like make your idea and then describe it or something like that. But yeah, the junior high school teaching experience, I think, helped me in that like I've never been in an adult audience that's like a harder crowd than like a bunch of junior high school kids.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like whatever at this point, like you can, be not into it, you can be whatever, but compared to like 13-year-olds, like whatever, like I've been like inoculated by that, whatever, surly corporate kind of stuff that you want to pull is still nothing compared to some 13-year-olds.
No kidding. Life is all about perspective, right? You can't appreciate how easy or difficult something is unless you've been on the other side of that spectrum. And the further your range goes of experiences, more comfortable you are anywhere towards the middle, right? So it's pretty interesting. And back into that piece about trying too hard, that was something you said. There was a couple things I thought were really cool there. Like in this process of engaging with other people and creating something, like you never want to try too hard to make somebody laugh in a crowd. Like it has to flow natural. Same thing with the creativity. It has to flow out. You can't be trying to make this most insane creative, because it's going to be inauthentic and it's not going to resonate because it's going to feel forced. I think there's definitely something there that I just had a little note. I wanted to reiterate that, but I like that. So, let's see. Oh, also on the other side of performing arts, like I've started doing this thing in the past 2 years now. I started doing a literal weekly live stream where I do art live, like literally performing, like bringing in this thing and I'm drawing on it, I'm talking and I'm drinking and laughing and being stupid. And there's a whole like art in itself to talking to yourself on a live stream for 2-3 hours straight and not being boring. And like the work's exciting and I get, on some levels, but on some levels I'm just shading this thing for like, 20 minutes. Like I've got to like talk and laugh and make some jokes and bring up things. And that's really hard to do. And there was a time where I was doing interviews at the same time while doing the art. And it got to be like really stressful to perform under all those things. I did 6 or 7 of those. And I made some great art during them, but it was a lot. But that just like performance as an artist and an illustrator and designer kind of all rolled in like that for me was like the pinnacle of it. And it was a little much sometimes. So I stopped, like, I was trying to do art for people live on the show while they're watching, which is just like, that's a lot.
Right. Yeah, because you want the show to be good, but you also want the like final result to be good, right? And
yes.
You realize like how much of a badass Bob Ross must have been.
Oh my God, savage! It's like a happy little accident, happy trees, and everything was happy. I was like, bro, I'm losing my shit over here, like.
Right. Like, especially with his stuff where it's like, okay, well, he clearly had this vision in his head, but like the way it often started was just like, oh, here's some blobs of paint and some brushstrokes. And then you're like, holy shit. It's like this whole like Yellowstone scene or whatever, right? And it's like, how did those turn into trees all of a sudden?
Pure magic. Even all these years later, if you go back and watch a Bob Ross show and you don't think that's magical, like there's something wrong with you, because that is just magical levels of creativity and manifestation. Like, can't say enough good things.
There was like no digital fuckery with that at all.
No,
you couldn't hide any of that.
Nothing. This guy's just like bloom, 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 and it's like a whole like trees just came out of nowhere. It's like, dude, you just hit that with 3 brushes in like 5 seconds, and I couldn't have done that in an hour and a half with like real focus. And he's just like, yeah, you just use the brush technique, and that's I just love it, dude.
And just like so relaxed, or looks so relaxed, so calm,
so relaxing. So I try to channel some of that, and I talk about Bob Ross a bunch when I'm streaming because I think about that often, that exact same line of consciousness. But for me, I'm doing like, I started leaning more to like abstract stuff, like my dad's kind of things. And the whole stream is about like, I call it For the Love of Creativity. But it's all about me just like manifesting a beautiful piece of art and not being afraid of fucking it up, right? Just colors and expression and just things. It's almost like taking ink blots and making them into something, right? Like, so like I started leaning more into that, and that's fine. I had Gage Mitchell on one time. I made this really crazy, gnarly face on there while Gage was watching. He's like, man, that's really cool. And he's like, oh, we should try this. And then it really became something quite beautiful. But I got away from like trying to do a piece of art for the person on the show because that just didn't work for me. But like just doing art for art's sake and I'm making something cool while I'm talking to somebody, I could do that. So
totally.
Yeah. So that's where that's evolved to. But if you haven't had a chance to check that out, I'd love it if you check it out sometime.
Yeah, I'd love to check that out. I feel like, the whole like live streaming while making art, while designing stuff is like a whole like boss level of performance, which I'm interested in, but not interested in doing for myself, But yeah, that's great.
Dude, I record them too and make NFTs and link the whole process of making the art into the NFT. I have this whole deep, like technologically engrossed thing with it. It's super dope. So anyway.
Yeah. Or even just like the playback. Like I got into this during the pandemic where I was just like was drawing a lot on using Procreate, and like when you can export that as a video, it's like, oh yeah, all of these things happen while trying to draw this thing. So stuff like that is cool to just see, because in some ways it's like you're also peering into somebody's mind of like how they were thinking in this period of time to create this thing. Yeah,
absolutely. I love the idea that it's a recording. So like, that's the coolest thing for me about this whole process is like, you see this art and it's exciting, but someone like you or I, or anyone with any kind of creative inclination or human curiosity, maybe just like, well, how the hell did they even get there? Cause that's wild, right? Like, and then having that recording where you can just like go through it. And I love time lapses. I don't know if you love to watch people like, and just see their brain working and moving the thing around and in and out and cut this off.
Totally. Yeah.
It's so cool. So.
Yeah. Like riffing on that Bob Ross point, like I grew up with a lot of like PBS stuff. And so besides like his show, another one of my favorites were like those, there's segments on like Sesame Street or something where they would go and it'd be like, it was just like the process of making something could be like canned tuna fish or whatever, right? And it was like there was no voiceover. It was just like the factory machines doing their things. And so you didn't know what it was until it like came out at the other end of the assembly line. It's like stuff like that is just fascinating.
Super fascinating, right? And that in itself was as a whole designed experience. Not that like a human's interacting with that, but like they like factory assembly stuff. I used to watch those growing up too. It's like, that's crazy how all that's automated. It's only getting crazier now with like AI and robots, and like it's just the level of things they can make is quite wild. So,
yeah.
All right, so we are coming up on time here, but before we wrap, we one last question for you. Is there anyone or anything in your career that you would like to shout out to the audience? Maybe a mentor or a valuable resource, a favorite client, something you think would be helpful for people to look into. So.
Yeah, I would like to shout out Creative Live. They are like one of these online learning sites. They do video-based courses for creatives, designers, photographers, all sorts of creative professionals. They took a chance on me back in 2017. So I taught a design thinking and futures thinking class with them. That's on their catalog. But since then, I've also just been watching their stuff. And it's a great complement to all of the free stuff that you can get on YouTube and out there. But I think it's particularly aimed at designers and other creative professionals in a way that, say, like LinkedIn Learning is just more generic in that sense. So shout out to Creative Live for all of the stuff that they do for learning in the community. Other shout outs, I think I'd also shout out to Cheryl Heller, who is an AIGA medalist. She started this program at SVA where I still teach. She's since moved on in her career, but she took a chance on me. She gave me my first college teaching position at SVA, and then since then I've gone to teach at other schools and stuff like that. So shout out to her as well. Amazing. I think everything related to learning, because I'm always committed to that.
Love that. I love that. And thank you for, paying it forward to future generations so we continue to have amazing creative thinkers and designers and the up and comers, right? So that's our job. as we're becoming middle-aged or whatever I don't know what you consider yourself.
Oh, I am very much early. I'll say early middle-aged. You can say that.
I tell people I'm half dead.
Yeah.
Anyhow, all right. So, and a big shout out to AIGA. That's how you and I ended up meeting. We were both volunteers there. Now you're full-time at AIGA. I've been for a while, I assume, but I think you were already full-time when I met you, but I was just volunteer president at my local chapter. But amazing organization. If you want to say anything about that, give them a little shout out. So,
yeah. Thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we've been talking with Lee-Sean Huang, who is the Senior Director of Learning and Programs at AIGA and co-founder of Foossa. Lee-Sean, if people want to follow up with you, where should they go?
I am easily findable on all of the social medias. I'm not on TikTok, but I'm on all of the other big ones. I'm just at Lee-Sean pretty much everywhere. So it's Leesean. It's Lee like Bruce Lee, Sean like Sean Connery. You can find me on the internets.
Perfect. All right, Lee-Sean, well, thank you so much for being on our show. And until next time, friends, take it easy.
Thanks so much. Bye.
We really hope you enjoyed the show. Please like and subscribe to join us on our next journey through the world of art and business on the Pixel Retentive Podcast.